New. I'm John St. Baptiste. Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about the beginning part of Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. Now, this is an amazing book. I've always been interested in Norse mythology, and the fact that Gaiman actually put together his own interpretation of it, I think, is really great. One of the things I love about this book is that, like a traditional folklorist who would be in, a tribe or group or whatever, uh, he tells the stories in his own manner and takes his own little bit of license. It's always been to me one of the most intriguing things about mythology. Um, it's always been one of the most intriguing things about mythology to me is uh, people being able to put their own spin on it and give their own version. Julianne89. Okay, so my sound's okay? Because I was having some issues earlier. And yes, Lady Loradane's Starfall. If you can find the audiobook version that's narrated by Neil, is definitely worth it. Absolutely, definitely worth it. It's a really funny story. This copy, my stepmom knows how much I love Neil Gaiman, and she, as a travel agent, she works at an airport, and someone had just left it there, and so she picked it up and brought it home for me, which was pretty cool. So that's how I got my copy. I didn't even have to buy one. I do have a bought one because for those um, those of you who have issues with defilers of books, I am a unashamed, unabashed defiler of books. But anything that I'm going to take my highlighter and my pen to, I do get a second copy to try and keep in a little better shape. It all goes back for me to, my father really instilled a lot of my love of literature in me, and he's an ordained minister. He's not a Catholic. He made the decision to be a Protestant, but he's an ordained minister, and I actually have his Bible that he used when he was studying during that 40 years ago, and has all his little highlights and his underlinings and so forth. And I just think it's so cool. So yeah, I do defile books. Sorry, guys. Hope it doesn't offend anybody too much. No, this isn't a first edition. I spent much more money on my first edition, Lady Lordaine. And that is, sitting on the Gaiman shelf. And I don't have it in Mylar. I do have 3 first editions of Fire and Blood that I bought that are in Mylar. I'm waiting for the next book to come out, and then I'm going to sell them. Of course, I have my own too, but So I'm going to say hello to everybody really quick. I already said hi to Lady Laura Dane. We've got, Lady Laura Dane Starfall. Seems like you add a new name to your name every time I talk to you. So, pretty soon it's going to be like reading a scroll, which is great. I think it's just brilliant. We've got Peter Griffin. We've got Catherine Harding. Hello. We have Maura Lee. Says she's only going to be able to hang out for a minute, but it's always good to see you. If you can come back and check this out later, that would be awesome. Bear Island Josh, of course, which, by the way, I have an announcement for you in just a moment, sir. Julianne89. If anybody gets into my music postings that I put up, which there should be one tomorrow. It was supposed to be up yesterday, but I had no hot water in my apartment, so I had to have the maintenance guys come out. But yeah, so music videos should be out. If you get into those, Julianne89 actually has done all my artwork for me, and it's just absolutely amazing. You pop over to my playlists, definitely worth looking at. Honestly, I actually kind of have to clean up my playlists. Forrest Blurt is here, says that he will be listening from afar. And we have, it looks like, a new friend to the channel, Kiwatali. If I pronounced that incorrectly, please let me know. 2004. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. And House Lorebridge is here. Says she's also listening, but she's at work, so has to do that on the DL. Oh, Maura, thank you. It's good to be loved. So, Bear Island Josh, it was decided after a lot of consideration that in the Get the Christmas present contest, you have won. So you have, and like I said, it's not in the greatest of shape because I've had it since my sophomore year in high school, but this is Neil Gaiman's Sandman poster from the final season of the comic book. Please, I know you're a friend of mine on Facebook, which, by the way, follow me on Facebook, folks. But get me your address, and I will make sure this gets mailed to you. Because that's going to be your holiday present. I'm not sure which holiday you celebrate in the middle of winter, but whichever one it is, it's going to be your present for that. So let's get to the book. As I was saying, I love how Gaiman does his own take. He tells stories we're familiar with, but gives his own version of them. And, I really like that. I like that he tells them in his own way, because that's what mythology and folklore are all about. And I know that the literary and entertainment aspect of my channel really focuses a lot on Neil Gaiman, but he's who I want to talk about. And hey, it's my F channel. But so for anyone who's not read this yet, the first 3 chapters just pretty much give you the background, and that's kind of what we're going to go over today. I love that he gives it very simply, but in his own voice. And things you're going to need to know as you go through this book. Well, first, let's get to the introduction. He has a really good point here in the introduction, that a lot of what we have of Norse mythology came actually after those people, the Icelandic people, the Scandinavian people, the Germanic people, were Christianized. And so therefore a lot of these stories are being told somewhere between 300 to 500 years after the Christianization of what is now Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, Denmark, Germany, so forth. So these come much later, and so it's all through a lens. And I really like that he points out that he didn't want to go to the books that have been written about this, but actually went back to what was written by Snorri Sturluson in. Oh, my pronunciation was perfect. That's amazing. Yeah, if it's not Latin, my pronunciation's awful, so I'm pretty proud of myself. Actually, that's not true. So, a really quick sidebar here. My ex taught ESL to Japanese students, and um, because of that, my Japanese pronunciation is amazing, and I don't have a bloody clue what I am saying. But my pronunciation's amazing. So with that exception, yes, outside of Latin, my pronunciation's pretty awful. So I'm proud that I caught that. Quaddly. Is that a reference to Quetzalcoatl? I'm just wondering. I'm curious. But so he wanted to go back to the earliest source material to tell his own version, so he wasn't influenced by Victorian writers who did their own interpretations of the Norse myths. So these first three chapters are really just giving you some background. You have the creation myth, which almost any religion has. There are different types of creation myth, but they generally follow one of three patterns. It's either the dawning of something out of nothing, almost like the Big Bang, or when God said, "Let there be light," or you have an earlier group of, or singular, um, adversaries that the younger generation has to destroy in order to start and create uh, what eventually becomes existence and the earth, and particularly mankind. And then also you have the third, which usually involves, of all things, defecation. Um, actually, one of my favorite creation myths is the one that the Pacific Northwestern Native Americans have, where actually the whole world is literally the god Raven's shit. Literally a big pile of feces, which we all have days that we feel that way, I can imagine. At least I do. But so we go directly into the creation myth. Before the beginning, there was nothing: no earth, no heavens, no stars, no sky. Only the mist world, formless and shapeless, and the fire world always burning. And he goes over really succinctly the the different realms that are connected to uh, the world tree, which he goes into as well. And so you begin, you have Mispel and you have Niflheim. And if anybody out there speaks German, please correct me. I do my best, like I said. Which, between the two, that's all you had. You have fire and ice. And that's the entire world that is embodied at the moment and Ymir is born. And I think it's really interesting that Gaiman points this out, because a lot of your Victorian writers who wrote about um, a lot of your Victorian writers glossed over a lot of stuff. And it just so happens that if you go back to the original works, Ymir was neither male nor female, or it was both. And he was the only living thing. He also had a hornless cow, which figures in later. But the hornless cow licked salty blocks of ice for food and drink, and its milk fed Ymir. And Ymir eventually had a child. Now, first, the cow licks this block of ice and creates a person. Um, I always love that so many different mythologies across the world, creation of people comes. It's almost like sculpting. Like you start with a piece of wood, or you start with which we'll get to in a bit, or a clay doll, or in this case, a block of ice, and that's how a being is created. And this being is Buri, the ancestor of the gods. So Ymir slept, and while it slept, it gave birth to a male and female giant from his armpit. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't read this or haven't read really much Norse mythology, there's a lot of nasty stuff, like armpit babies, and it just gets worse. But icky. Like, it's my armpit baby. I But yeah, their creation story involves a lot of that. But once again, you get back to a lot of creation stories, and it involves um, spontaneous birth of beings, particularly gods, and it also involves the eventual demise of the creating deity. Oh, Catherine, you never see anyone doing discussions about nonfiction books, which are your favorites. So thank you. Well, you're welcome. Actually, I'm going to be going through this whole book, so probably the next few weeks is going to be about that. I'd say probably up until about Christmas. Also, I'm going to try and have some guests on here. Amy True Than True is not always going to be able to make it. She's got a lot going on right now, and this is the busy time of year for her work. But there are a few other people who have said that they would be interested in doing so. And yes, Josh, turtles vomiting up the universe. That's another great creation myth. Maybe we'll get into the Vedas sometime. That would be a long, long, long series, though. I mean, we're talking like 1,200 pages. But so Ymir has the first giants, and Buri takes a wife from one of these giants. And they have a son called Bor. Bor married Besla, daughter of a giant. And together they had three sons, Odin, Vili, and V. Now, this is when we get into the characters who we're a little more familiar with. And by the way, this is really based off Norse mythology. So I'm not saying that the storytelling style is bad, but if you're used to Marvel Odin and Marvel Thor and Marvel Loki, this is a lot different. Very, very different. Uh, which Gaiman actually goes into in his introduction to the book. But their characters are very different. And let's just face it, Thor's pretty thick. I mean, he fell out of the stupid tree and hit every branch on his way down. Catherine, you just ordered it from the next closest library, which is 4 hours away. Where do you live that the next closest library is 4 hours away? Are you like in Alaska or something? I'm just curious. Uh, so when Odin, Vili, and V, they realized that because of a mirror, nothing's ever going to change. We got fire on one side, ice on the other, and nothing else. As it says right here, they might as well have been nowhere. So, of course, being, as logical and rational as gods usually are, I would read the Odyssey sometime if you want to see about logical and rational gods, because, yeah, wow. They killed a mirror. It says here, it had to be done. There was no other way to make the worlds. This was the beginning of all things, the death that made all life possible, which is also recurring in. Oh, Catherine, you're in northern BC, so at the opposite end of British Columbia from Clarissa Thompson, because she's like just north of Washington. Uh, so now they start creating stuff, as gods will do. And I'm going to read this verbatim because it's so well told, and it's kind of gives you a clue to what I was talking about. Odin and his brothers made the soil from Ymir's flesh. Ymir's bones they piled up into mountains and cliffs. Our rocks and pebbles, the sand and gravel you see, these were Ymir's teeth. And the fragments of bones that were broken and crushed by Odin and Vili V in the battle with Ymir. The seas that girdle the worlds, these are Ymir's blood and sweat. Look up into the sky. You are looking at the inside of Ymir's skull. Stars you see at night, the planets, all the comets and the shooting stars, these are the sparks that flew from the fires of Muspel. And the clouds you see by day, those were once Ymir's brains. And who knows what thoughts they are thinking even now. Nothingness without form, yes. It's quite often the starting point of a lot of uh, different world mythologies. In the beginning and the end, it was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Same, very similar concept, which also comes back to what I was talking about. You have to take into consideration that the earliest recordings we have of Norse mythology came after these deities were no longer being worshipped. Like generally, all of the Germanic and Scandinavian countries had been Christianized. So one has to take into consideration that quite a bit of their mythology might have changed a bit since then. Uh, especially things that are kept in oral tradition like that, they change over time. Gaiman, in fact, in his introduction, laments that almost all the stories involving the goddesses of the Norse pantheon, like there's no real recording of, because those stories have been lost. So if this sounds familiar, the world's a flat disk. The sea encircles the parameters. What Gaiman does here that I really like is, and if you just read this first chapter, he really in 3 chapters and first 31 pages, he really gives the entire background that one needs to start reading these tales. And that was kind of the point I wanted to get across. He throws out, the occasional tidbit, but in general, he's just giving you the background. But he does it in 30 pages. And with that, I think even the layperson who doesn't have a lot of familiarity with this mythology can still follow what's going on and not be confused. And if there ever is a point of confusion, please leave in the chat, leave it in the comment section down below. But more than anything, I appreciate you all coming out here to talk about this book. So now we come to the whole thing with the Aesir, so we have Aesir and Vanir, which are 2 different groups of gods. Now, most theologians and anthropologists think that the Vanir were the original deities in this area, and as the people who worshiped the Aesir took power, they were incorporated into their mythology. But they're 2 very distinct different races. And they have giants. These guys are always having trouble with giants, like all the time. Even though one of their gods is actually a giant. But we'll get into that in just a moment. Excuse me. Lady Laura Dane, you're confused by Ragnarok. Well, that's kind of the end of the story. And it's kind of what the myths lead up to. But in a general overarching concept, Ragnarok is the war at the end of the time when the gods will have their final battle with the frost giants and the fire giants, and the monsters, who we find out about their parentage a little later on, are released. Everybody dies. Everybody. But then a new world is born from that. It's a very cyclical tale. But Ragnarok, yeah, I mean, it will take its whole own episode to explain that, just because that's the end of everything. It's not divertible. It's not changeable. It's just going to happen. Or theoretically and figuratively, with a lot of mythologians, the belief is that the way it was written in the medieval texts is that it had already happened, and that's what gave birth to the Europe we had in the Christian era. So yeah. So we will definitely get to Ragnarok, Laura, but it's going to be a minute or two. You're asking for the end of the story at the beginning. You're like one of those people who flip to the last page to see how the book's going to end, which is fine. perfect way to enjoy things. So this is when we come to the creation of man and woman, because they're, they make this whole world after they defeat Ymir, but they don't have any people to populate it. And so what they decide to do, they find two logs. One's they're on the shore, like right next to each other. And one's an ash log and one's an elm log. The ash tree is resilient and handsome, and its roots grow deep. Its wood carves well and will not split or crack. Ashwood makes a good tool handle or the shaft of a spear. And this is actually true. Any garden tools you have, they probably have ash handles. Ash trees are really, really dominant, and they figure quite a bit into Norse mythology, as we'll see as we go along here. The other was an elm tree. The elm's graceful, the wood's hard enough to be made into the toughest planks or beams. You can build a fine home or hall from elm wood. So the gods take the two logs. First, Odin held them and breathes life into them. Then Vili gives them will. He gave them intelligence and drive. Now, if you get into any theology, that's always the important turning point in humanity, is when they're given free will. Now, yes, I know I'm obsessive. Yes, I know that I have probably read it more than any other thing I've read, except for maybe Tolkien. But Paradise Lost, I mean, that's what it's all about. It's about free will. And I always think that in any mythology, it's an important point, is when human beings are given free will. Finally, and interestingly, this is when they're carved into people. First, the logs are given life, then they're given free will, then they're carved into people by V. And then they're made some clothes, and they give them names. First man's name was Ask, which means ash tree, and the woman was called Embla, elm tree. Really creative here. But they're the father and mother of all of us. Every human being owes life to its parents and their parents before him. Go far back enough, and the ancestors of each were Ask and Embla. And they stayed in Midgard, which is what we call the Earth, our world. The tree of Yggdrasil stems out, and there are other regions. Midgard is the Earth that we live on, which also is where the term Middle Earth comes from, if anybody out there is a Tolkien fan. And that's why Odin's, one of his many, many, many names, is Allfather, is because he breathed life into humanity. The next chapter we get to Yggdrasil, and it's a mighty tree. It's an ash tree. As I said, ash is figured prominently throughout Norse mythology, and it reaches from the lowest point to the highest point. And when you read this chapter, it tells you about all the different regions that you have. It also, here in this chapter, mentions Bifrost, which is a bridge that leads from Asgard to everywhere else. And it's a rainbow bridge. The only people who can cross it are the gods. If any giant were to step on it, it would break. Or any trolls. But you have the different regions. So you have Asgard, you have Alfheim, which is where the light elves live. Nedvilar, also called Svartenheim, which is where the dwarfs or the dark elves live. And these aren't your dark elves from like Ari Salvatore or Morrowind or something like that. Very different concept. Midgard, which as I was talking about, is the world that we live in. Jotunheim, where the frost giants live. Vanaheim, where the Vanir live, the correspondents of the Asgardians. Nephilim, which is the dark mist below. Muspel, which is the world of flame, and that's where Surtur is till the end of time. And finally, you have Hell, and that's where those who did not die valiantly go. Hell is spelled with one L, not double hockey stick, and it's not like the Judeo-Christian hell. It's far more similar to Greek Hades. There's just like nothing. You spend the rest of eternity just nameless, faceless, godless. It's which too I would imagine to a culture that is so into valor and glory and great deeds, that would be more, that would be a worse punishment than fire and brimstone and all of that. That would at least be my assumption. When we speak about the Norns are destiny. They come up very, very often. You do see a repeating motif through all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different mythologies of the three-faced goddess. Generally, it's a maiden mother crone concept, but you have essentially that. You have sorry, I'm working with the pronunciation. Erd, who's fate and destiny. Verdendi, which means becoming, and she controls the present. And Skuld, whose name means that which is intended, and her domain's the future. It's very similar to Clotho, Lachesis, and Artipus in Greek mythology. Yeah, Josh, at least fire and brimstone would be something. Got to stimulate those senses, right? And they have Erd's will, and that's where your fate is shaped. It gives you wisdom. So we get to the last very short chapter here. And this is our first actual story. In Jotunheim, in the home of the giants, is Mimir's well. And Mimir is the wisest of all gods. And I'm going to quote some stuff here. As well as wisdom, and when the world was young, he would drink every morning from the well by dipping his horn, known as the Gjallahorn, into the water and draining it. Odin comes up one day and asks if he can drink from his well. And Mimir, who happens to be his uncle, doesn't say anything. Nobody can drink from the well. Seldom do those who are silent make mistakes. I love that line. But he just doesn't respond. And Odin keeps talking him into it, trying to talk him into it. So what do I need? Name your price. And Mimir says, "Your eye is my price. Your eye in the pool." Now, Odin had just gone through giant country, which is pretty dangerous for an Aesir. And he's like, "I risked my life. What's an eye?" He says, "Give me a knife," and cuts his eye out, drops it in the well, drinks from the water, and now he sees more with his one eye than he had seen with two. Seeing nothing and seeing everything. So then we get to the Aesir and the Vanir had been warring, and it's calming down. You know, things are getting calm finally. And Odin sends Mimir to the Vanir to be an advisor to their god Hönir. And when Mimir's around, Honor makes good decisions and wise decisions and knows what he's doing. But when Mimir's not, then Honor's unable to come to a decision. Now, here's the effed up thing: the Vanir get tired of this, so they don't kill the king. They kill Mimir. They cut off his head and send it back to Odin. But Odin's not angry. He rubs the head, casts incantations on it, and basically preserves it and brings the head back to life. And he places it back next to the well where his eye is, in the waters of the future and the past. Now, this is going to be very important later. The Gjallarhorn Odin gives to Heimdall, who's the watchman of the gods. And on the day it's blown, it will wake the gods no matter where they are, no matter how deeply they sleep. But he's only going to blow it once, and that's at the end of all things, at Ragnarok. So, those are the first three chapters. I have to get up for one moment, but if you have any questions you'd like to ask or discussion you'd like to have about those, please drop them into the chat, and I will be back in just one moment. Oh, I am back. Let's see. Yes, Josh, 10 out of 10 people do look more badass with an eye patch. This is very true. One moment here. I'm having a bit of tech difficulty. Sorry about that. True. Difficulty. Catherine, yes, I'll be doing these every Wednesday. Now, in my reread here, I forgot how short some of these chapters are, and then how really long some of them are. So, how many I'll be doing is going to change from week to week. Also, I will be having some guests on. If anybody is interested in that, please private message me. I would be happy to have you on. I love when I have somebody I can talk to you about stuff and bounce things off of. Uh, yeah, Josh, I do like Ian McShane as Odin. Um, very, very good. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about Norse origins, the beginning of Norse mythology, the whole background story, and all of that? Give you a second to maybe write those down. Josh, I hope you're excited about your poster. I would definitely find a frame or something to protect it. Like I said, it is quite old and a little beat up. And I'm sure you don't want to get any more so. Who really? Okay, Lady Laura Dane. I'll smoke another one, John. Uh, says who wrote these myths? One person or many people? Well, they started as folklore that was handed down orally, and eventually were written down. I always remember Snorri Sturluson's name because really, how the fuck do you forget a name like that? Uh, the other big one that a lot of the work is taken from. I'm sorry, I'm looking it up for you right now, dear. Oh, my glasses keep falling off. Need to take those and get them fixed. Oh, now the big Victorian ones I was talking about were Roger Lancelin Green and Kevin Crossley Holland. But the original was the Prosetta by Snorri Sturluson's, and the Poetic Edda, which the author is unknown. So I hope that helps. And that's one of the, I've always found one of the most interesting things about religion, mythology, theology. It grows over time. Things change, so I think that's what makes it so interesting. If you read, mythology and legends and so forth. It's almost like playing a game of telephone. One person tells the story, another person and it goes on. And by the 10th reader, it has some of the basic concepts that were there, but it's completely different. And that's one of the things I was getting into earlier. That some of the bits and pieces I was getting into earlier are about how each person has their own voice. But one of the things I find most interesting, probably because I've studied Joseph Campbell so much, is how across so many cultures there are these leitmotifs that myths have, that stories have, and so forth. I'm not quite as diehard as he was about the journey of the hero, even though that is, I would say, 90% of stories at least can be based on that. I have my own thoughts and views on that. Maybe having a discussion with a few people would be an interesting video if anybody would be interested in that sometime, maybe after we finish this up. Is there different views on the hero's journey? Because I do want to expand some of the stuff that we're doing on Wednesdays. But oh, I'm sorry. It's interesting how the Bible, mainly the First Testament, is so consistent over time. I don't know if that makes sense. Are you talking about translation of it? And by the First Testament, are you talking about the Torah, like the five uh, basic books of the Bible, or yeah? Please elaborate on that if you don't mind. Beryl and Josh, I have to disagree with you there. I see where you're coming from. I mean, at the most basic level, yes, there are essentially only two stories. Uh, but I have to go with the concept that there are 24 Allegros. But yeah, I mean, you'll see a story told the same in a very similar manner over and over and over again. I think there are more than two, but there are some basic motifs that throughout history and throughout literature over and over again. I mean, shit, The Lion King is pretty much Hamlet. And by the way, did anybody see the live Little Mermaid the other night? I heard it was really bad, but I don't want to make a judgment because I didn't get to check it out. Laura, no words and stories written and handed down through generations. Well, yeah, that's the thing. There can be a lot of consistency to that, especially when you look at a lot of your indigenous tribes, like particularly in Africa and the Americas, and Aborigines in very, very particularly. You can see almost word for word a passing down of these tales. Um, so yeah, I definitely do find it, back to your original question, pretty interesting that it's so consistent. Um, I'm getting off topic, but I don't mind that at all. That's what we do on this channel. Yeah, with the Bible, what's really interesting with biblical writing is if you get to if you check out the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were 2,000 years old or more, you know, depending on which scroll you're talking about. The majority of the Old Testament has since then been almost word for word consistently translated. The only time that things have changed is when it's been translated to another language. But if you look at uh, a Torah now, and you look at the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, in the old Dead Sea Scrolls, almost word for word exactly the same. It's amazing that something like that can be done for 2,000 years. Watch The King on Netflix. I don't have Netflix, and honestly, I am so backlogged on shows that people tell me to watch. I'll put it on the list, but it's gonna be a minute. But yeah, if you want, PM me a little more information about that, because I'll definitely try to check it out. I may or may not know somebody who may or may not know a website where I can download all of these things, or where somebody could. I would never do that, of course. That's illegal. And I've never done an illegal thing in my life. Ever. But so next week we will be getting into our more of the stories and myths and legends. And in Norse mythology, you've got the three biggies, the 3 big characters, which are Odin, Thor, and Loki. And we're going to learn a lot more about them. So everyone, I really hope you get a chance to read this. And I hope to see you here next week and in the following weeks, because I really enjoy talking about this, and I enjoy the questions and discussion that you throw out there. So once again, I want to thank you all. Thank you for coming out here. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I put out music content and literature content every week, usually. And I love to share these things with you, and I love the conversations that I get with you. And yes, Bear Island Josh, we will definitely talk about Horus Loki. So I'm going to let you all have a wonderful afternoon / evening / morning, whichever it is. And I am looking forward to seeing you again next Wednesday. Like I said, I may have a special guest. I'll get a little more information about that soon, but should be cool. So those of you who are fans of the Cylon Johns, I'll see you Friday night for the Cylon Johns episode. If you want to check that out, just look up the Cylon Johns on YouTube, and we talk about Battlestar Galactica every week. We're winding down season 3, so this episode's pretty fun. We always have first-time watchers for our panel, which is also really cool. So I'm going to let you all enjoy your evenings. Thank you for coming out here. And in the meantime, please be excellent to one another and party on.